I like to design big geometric sculptures and get a crowd of folks together to help me assemble them. Here's a giant cardboard construction which I made with a group of teachers. The design consists of 60 identical parts. They connect together with just slots, but it's very tricky to get the ins and outs of the structure just right. Using a bandsaw, I had cut the parts ahead of time in my studio and brought them with me for the assembly workshop. After demonstrating how the parts join together, I let everyone experiment a bit to get familiar with the shapes. Each part has 7 slots, and they're carefully calculated to join in just one particular way to make this specific structure. So playing with them for a while and making up terminology for the different slots is very helpful. We need to have a common language for describing the parts, their arms, legs, belly buttons, whatever, before people can work effectively in groups and communicate to each other what to do. These teachers are from Math for America in New York City, a nonprofit organization that supports excellence in math and science public education. They're a pretty sharp group, so I decided to try a very challenging activity with them. The initial stages are quite confusing because it's hard to visualize the complete pattern from isolated parts. But I'm happy to let people just feel confused at the start of a workshop. In fact, I think it's a very good experience for teachers to feel a bit lost at first, because it helps them relate better to how some students might feel in a class. And I know I like the feeling you get when you begin to make sense of something that felt incomprehensible at first. So I'm hoping the teachers also experience that feeling of enlightenment. The design here is chiral, which means there's a choice of left-handed versus right-handed construction. Either way would be fine, but we all have to agree and build it with the same handedness. Then it's largely a matter of following some local rules about how the parts connect. If it's locally correct everywhere, then the global structure will also be correct. That's analogous to the idea that if you follow a local rule of always putting 5 equilateral triangles together, you'll end up with an icosahedron without even knowing at what angle the triangles meet. In a similar way, we don't need to worry about angles here. They work out automatically as part of the overall structure if we just make the correct local connections. The basic module we're using is a group of 3 pieces that connect together in a cycle around a circular opening. Then we join these 3-part modules together to build up the overall structure. The long arms of the pieces are sticking out in all crazy directions at first, and they get in the way when positioning additional modules, but slowly the structure begins to take form. After 5 modules close in a cycle, we can see one of the large 5-way openings. When finished, there'll be 12 of these openings, arranged like the 12 pentagons of a dodecahedron. Initially, we're just holding the parts up in the air, but at this point we can put it down on the floor for a while. The 5-way opening is facing downwards, and we can add more parts all around it. We always work by adding modules to the growing structure. It may be tempting to make 2 halves independently and then put them together as one big final step. But all the protruding arms would collide, and that would never work. At this stage, there's enough structure assembled that I can hold its shape pretty well, and we can hang it up. The cardboard is strong enough that I can tie it to a string on just one corner and connect that to a clip in the ceiling. The advantage of that is it's easier to see everything and have people work on it at a convenient height from all sides at once, and it's nice to spin it around too. The 3-fold axes of the design correspond to the corners of a dodecahedron. They pass through the 20 3-fold connections on the outside and also go through the circular holes just below them on the inside. Here there are still some pieces to add, but it's too dense now to fit in a complete 3-part module, so our strategy is to add parts one at a time. Besides the logical challenge of getting everything to weave through the other parts properly, there's also a physical challenge of reaching around inside to access the inner connections. It's still a bit confusing, but it's a fun kind of puzzle where you can see the pattern and you can tell if something is not added correctly. So one part at a time, we keep thinking about symmetry and adding pieces, sometimes having to remove one that went in incorrectly, but gradually making progress. And eventually, all 60 pieces are in place and all 420 slots are mated. It looks pretty good if I do say so myself. I'm always happy when one of these constructions is finished, as it's the culmination of weeks of work designing, planning, making the parts, and organizing the activity. The teachers and I discussed it for a while, brainstorming about how an activity like this might be used in a classroom or an after-school math club, when a sudden burst of gravity pulled the string off the ceiling and it landed on the floor. Happily, it's strong enough to hold together and keep its shape. My next experiment with this design will be a larger plywood version. Stay tuned for a future video.